LIDE transforms. LIDE supported the approval of the National Policy on Solid Waste, a law that reformulates Brazilian basic sanitation. LIDE innovates. LIDE helped to create the Pacto pelo Esporte, an agreement between companies sponsoring Brazilian sports. LIDE educates. LIDE collaborates with the Ayrton Senna Institute in education projects that reach 1 million children every year. LIDE connects. LIDE promotes connection to leverage relationships, partnerships, and new business. LIDE conquers, moves, renews, accomplishes, makes the future. LIDE participates.
Boa tarde a todos.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to our first virtual meeting. Unfortunately, it's a virtual meeting on agribusiness, and today we have the honor to join us in this very important sector for Brazil, and we have many prominent people in this meeting. In addition to the experts who will represent their entities, we have some representatives from LIDE Brazil and LIDE Europe. In Brazil, mainly LIDE Mato Grosso, Paraná, and São Paulo, and from Europe, UK, and Germany. Today, we will concentrate on two panels, one on reforesting and the other one, which is as so important to Brazil, not only for Brazil, but the second panel will be on biofuels, a sector in which Brazil is undoubtedly a leader. I don't want to continue for too long. I will introduce two keynote speakers. One is former Minister Luis Fernando Furlan, in addition to his functions as our global chairman of LIDE. He also carries out very relevant functions on a number of boards of companies, especially BR Foods, of which he is a shareholder. BR Foods is one of the biggest food groups in the world and has a very strong focus on animal protein. And he also sits on the board of other prominent companies such as Telefónica and GPO in Atlanta, the US. And our second keynote speaker, Marcos Young. Marcos hoje is a senior professor of agribusiness at INSPER. INSPER, he will explain what kind of institution this is, but this INSPER means to inspire, belong, and transform. And INSPER is an institution, it's an educational institution of a very high level. Mr. Young also has a doctorate in business administration. He's also an agronomist, and he was between 2007 and 2012, he was the president of a association of sugarcane, of the sugarcane sector. And we had various opportunities of working together. When he was president of this association, we participated in several industry congresses and so on. And without further ado, I would like to hand the microphone over to Minister Furlan, who will begin his presentation during this event on Brazilian agribusiness.
O microfone.
Desativar mudo. Ok. Obrigado, André. Uma boa tarde a todos. Para mim, é um prazer poder participar desse encontro. Bom, meu contato com a Alemanha, só para situar, vem dos anos 70, quando eu trabalhei quase 10 anos numa importadora de vinhos. E aí pude conhecer a produção alemã de vinhos, principalmente os brancos, do Mosel, do Sari, também me lembro das garrafas verdes e garrafas marrons, não é isso? E mais recentemente, né, a Alemanha é um grande parceiro do Brasil. E como ministro, estive várias vezes lá com o ministro Clement, que era o ministro da Economia, no sentido de ampliar as nossas relações comerciais e de investimentos. Bom, nós estamos vivendo uma época muito, muito, muito estranha, não é? Toda essa pandemia trouxe duas questões importantíssimas e algumas que estavam ainda relegadas, que são questões mundiais. Uma num futuro imediato, a segurança alimentar. E a segunda é a sustentabilidade. Vocês devem estar familiarizados com o ESG, né? Environment, Social e Governance, e que passou a ser uma tônica nas grandes empresas, principalmente naquelas de capital aberto, inclusive com grandes fundos de investimento que recusam investir em empresas que não tenham boa pontuação o Brasil acabou saindo na frente. Foi um dos poucos países do mundo que conseguiu aumentar a sua produção de alimentos em plena pandemia. E nos diversos segmentos da produção brasileira, em geral, matérias-primas, né? Soja, carnes, açúcar e outros, milho também agora, e driblando um pouco a infraestrutura, os problemas de infraestrutura no Brasil que ainda afetam bastante os custos do agronegócio brasileiro, né? Diferentemente de outros países, nós ainda temos o modal rodoviário como principal do transporte e muitas vezes a produção tem que andar 1.500 quilômetros ou mais para chegar nos portos. É importante também que a crise que aconteceu com a suinocultura na China potencializou a demanda, não só de carne suína, mas também de carne de frango, que é uma carne mais competitiva e mais barata, não é? A China, vocês sabem, reduziu 40%, 50% a produção de suínos, sendo o maior produtor e maior consumidor do mundo. O Brasil, provavelmente, o Marcos Janck vai falar sobre isso, eu vou passar bem rápido, é um país que desenvolveu extraordinariamente bem a tecnologia da agricultura tropical, inicialmente ajudado pelos japoneses na década de 70 para transformar uma área improdutiva, que não é a Amazônia, que é o Cerrado brasileiro, no centro do país, em um grande silo de produção agropecuária. Nós hoje podemos colher cerca de 3 safras em algumas regiões por ano. E isso veio através de tecnologias, do plantio direto, que foi desenvolvido aqui no Brasil, né? E com isso aumentando bastante.
So we increase a great deal profitability without having to increase the plantation areas. We increased 350% our production, and the plantation area was increased not in the same percentage. Something that is curious, that today we have 60 million hectares of plantation with grains. So if we had the productivity of 30 years ago, we would need 103 million of hectares in order to have a grain record harvest. We had that in 2020 and 2021. In other words, the productivity gain, we do not have to go to virgin areas. Today, Brazil has 65% of the natural coverage it had at the time of the Brazilian discovery in 1500. Two-thirds of the vegetal coverage of the forest is preserved, which is exactly the opposite of what they say in the press, that the Amazon is being devastated. This is not true. Only 9% is occupied by crop and 21% by pastures. Well, we have some challenges, as I said, infrastructure. I had a live with the Minister of the Infrastructure, who said that is gave a very positive aspect of increasing highways and railways, and increasing and improving harbors and stocking supply that will reduce costs. That is good for the Brazilian production. The trade agreements, I was president of Mercosur, the business forum, and we had Guido Ley in the European side, and we worked 20 years for this agreement. And when it was finally signed, some European countries are a little bit reticent to referend it, mainly because of the environmental topic. It's good to say that in January, the deforestation in the Amazon dropped 70%, which is the result of what the government did in terms of invasions and mining, illegal mining. And this group is commanded by the vice president of Amazon. The forestry code was also a great advancement that occurred in the last few years. We have very clear rules now, and that this has to do with the farming credit. Another important point, differently from Europe, the farming generations in Europe are getting old, and the youngest that go to university do not want to go back to their origins. Thus, we're having a transformation in the European farming as well. But in Brazil, we have something different. The youngest go to the university, they learn the technology, and they come back to their farms and apply new technologies as the use of drones, connectivity for the farming machines to work without any pilot. Andre and myself had an experience in a plant of agro in Europe where I drove a machine and I had to do anything just in the air conditioning and watching a screen. The farming machines are of last generation today, and the demand is increasing a great deal because of the profitability in the agribusiness, the prices as well, because of the Brazilian currency that was devaluated, and also because of the demand of China. The climate problems we have in the state of the Acre, near to Peru and Colombia, we had a great flood, near to Venezuela. And things, extreme things are occurring in Brazil, not only in Brazil, but all over the world with this problem of oil in Texas, which was totally unexpected. I would say that there is a study of USDA that says that in order to eradicate the hunger in the world, the food production should increase 20%. And for this, Brazil should increase its export in 30% because we are the great solution for the fight of hunger in the world. So there is a responsibility of Brazil that is very important, and we believe that what is lacking today in Brazil, among other things, is the diplomacy and political posture of the president and the Minister of Foreign Affairs, which is supplied by the Minister of Agriculture, Teresa Cristina, which is playing these roles and showing Brazil all over the world. The great challenges. Brazil is a country with a big supplier of commodities, but unhappily, we do not have worldwide brands. As you know, the biggest processor of coffee in the world is Germany in terms of values, and Italy in a second place, and none of them had any crops or plantation. They have dynamic industry that created brands and distribution, and this is an important business for them. The two most important producers of chocolate, Switzerland and Belgium, has no cocoa. So this lack of Brazilian brands or multinational Brazilian companies, and I have been working for one of them that was succeeded to build a brand, is the big challenge that we have today. I expect that each one of us that are taking part here to bring more things that we and try and process such information as the ones I'm talking about, and the other one with Marcus Young, with a friend, and we worked at BRF during many years. Thank you very much, Luis, for what you said. It's super important, but
muito pertinentes. Bom, Marcos, então a palavra é sua e, por favor, inicie sua fala.
Muito obrigado.
Marcos, you have the floor. Thank you, André. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. It's a great pleasure to be here with you, representing with LIDE from the states of Mato Grosso, from the UK, from Germany. I think this dialogue is very interesting, this conversation between Europe and Brazil that LIDE is promoting. It's a great pleasure to be with Luis Furlan, who was my mentor for so many years. At the time, I used to work for BR Foods, and also when we created a institution for the study of international trade. At that time, Brazil was involved in the various negotiation fronts, including with the European Union, and then with other entities. And Luis Furlan was the one who was able to get sponsors so that we could help build up the strategy that Brazil would follow during all its actions. Luis is someone who looks ahead always and has always done so. And he has always worked hard to make Brazil distinguish itself abroad, not only in terms of productivity and competitiveness, but also in terms of sustainability and in terms of aggregating value, as Mr. Furlan has just mentioned. So it's a pleasure to be here with you today and say a few words about my view on Europe and Brazil. I had the opportunity during my career to live 10 years abroad, 3 in the US, 3 in Europe, and now 4 in Asia. And this gave me an opportunity to see how Brazil is viewed abroad and in terms of agribusiness, which is my specialty. I'm going to start by saying the following. In 2020, we had the second biggest export volume from Brazil. We exported almost $101 billion. We had achieved $102 billion a few years ago. And this year we had not reached that previous record because of corn. And this during the pandemic, and a year when everything stopped, the whole world stopped, and Brazil hit record exports, focused mainly on emerging countries. Never has the emerging world been so important to agribusiness as now. Asia accounts for 66% of Brazilian exports. China alone accounts for 36% of these exports. In 2020, our exports to rich countries dropped by 4%. Total exports grew by approximately 5%, and exports to China grew by 8%, and exports to the emerging Asian countries in Southeast Asia, China, and Africa grew by nearly 30%, even though these are low numbers, but still very strong growth in terms of in times of pandemic. So as we said, Brazil is becoming one of the major countries that can assure food safety for the planet. And this was attested to very clearly by this year of pandemic. We had some problems with the supply chain because of the COVID, but Brazil nonetheless had the biggest second year in terms of exports. Of course, the foreign exchange rate also helps. Another factor that helps is the agribusiness did not stop and it was not put on hold, even though other sectors of the economy stopped. Agribusiness was going full speed ahead. And also, obviously, we had some incentives in the domestic market, which was not the disaster as people had expected to be. I remember ethanol, people thought this would stop the country because of the general downtime in the beginning of the year, but ethanol was not as bad as everybody expected. Of course, sugar was accounted for many of the exports. Brazil, fortunately, is very flexible in many products, but we had a very good year in terms of agribusiness last year. In terms of our international image, it has never been as bad as it is now. And this really is something weird. A country which is so efficient, which implemented this agricultural revolution, probably the most important agricultural revolution in the last 50 years. There was only another country that went through such a agricultural revolution, and that was the United States, which when in the 19th century, America expanded towards the West, and there were many universities focused on agribusiness were established in the United States, and Brazil's agricultural revolution started in the 60s. This is a recent revolution, and which is a combination of technology and people. And that is the success of Brazilian agribusiness. Thanks to European immigrants that had small properties, they went to the central west part of Brazil, went through a technological revolution, and our agriculture is low carbon. That's the most important aspect. So our agriculture has many environmental benefits. We have 2 harvests a year. Luis mentioned corn, and I would also mention cotton. So 2 crops that have 2 harvests together with soybeans. And Brazil is first in soybeans, second in corn and cotton. So this is a win-win combination and highly sustainable from the point of view of land economics. And now there's another revolution coming up, which is the integration of cattle raising. We have 70 million hectares of farmland, but we have more than that in terms of pastures. And these pastures a few years ago were very low in terms of productivity. But not only is the pasture productivity increasing in terms of dairy cattle and beef cattle, but we also have the possibility of farming on these pastures. Today, We are working on cattle raising in very sandy soil where nobody would imagine would have been impossible to have any kind of crops planting there. So this is the drive of our agribusiness. So 2 or 3 harvests per year, a revolution in terms of renewable energies, a forest code that is very, very demanding. In the midst of this positive experiences, which is unparalleled around the world, Brazil is seen as the villain of deforestation and climate change. When we look at the European, the press, and not only, any press from any country in Europe, every day there are articles criticizing the increase of deforestation in Brazil. And this obliges us to reflect, which is the following. Are we villains? Are we victims? Or are we the solution? And I think we are a bit of all three. We are villains in a way, which is real. And this is because of the fact that Brazil was unable in 2020 to regularize land ownership. So we still have a land ownership problem, which is gigantic. It has been around, this problem has been around for centuries, especially in the North region. And many of the farmers and cattle ranchers do not own their land, which is something extremely complicated. The control of deforestation is very fragile because there's much speculation, illegal mining, illegal logging. So this is a very complex issue, especially in the North region of Brazil. And we have a forest code, which is very strict, but was not implemented on a state basis. If we had implemented the forest code in the states, and if we had regulated everything in terms of land ownership, I'm sure that today's scenario would be entirely different in relation to sustainability issues. Unfortunately, we also have the solution, which I mentioned. So this combination of technologies that make land more productive and which should have high productivity. President Macron said that he would look for self-sufficiency in terms of soybeans in France or Europe. Come on. If Europe do this, it would produce 260 kilos per hectare of soybeans, while we produce 5,700 hectares of we produce much more in terms of corn and soybeans. Some kind of sustainable option is that President Macron wants. So we have to attack front-wise to be able to solve the issues I just mentioned. We have to deal with illegal deforestation. 98% of deforestation in Brazil is illegal, and we have also to attack the issues related to the forest code. It has to be implemented, and we have to improve the mechanisms of command and control. The problem is that all these factors nowadays are the factors that are staining Brazil's reputation and also are affecting a company's capitalization. These three factors, land ownership, illegal deforestation, and all of this leads to the following issue. We are having capitalization-related problems, and we're beginning to have problems of delivering products. And so, in spite of the fact that we are growing our exports to emerging countries, in the developed world, we are beginning to see barriers placed by supermarkets that say they will not buy products from deforested areas. We are beginning to see problems in financial areas, investment funds that they claim they will no longer invest in Brazil, banks that do the same. So this issue is not only an agriculture environmental issue, but it is an issue of nations' risk. So we have to have this awareness. We have to attack this on the side of public policies. And in terms of the companies, I track many companies. I'm on the board of 5 or 6 companies. I see that companies that are more exposed, what are they doing now? They are beginning to create their own systems, protection systems. They're going to control their suppliers. The big slaughterhouses will track cattle until all the way down to the calves. They will put monitoring systems in place. They will put certification systems in place. Tomorrow, I know that we have a panel on certification. So this is a system that big companies are using to protect themselves to ensure the origin of their supply chains. and so on. So all of this will include monitoring, traceability, the reclaiming of areas, the reclaiming of degraded pastures. All of this will be translated into ESG. So companies to be able to work in bigger markets, especially abroad, will have to comply with ESG metrics in terms of agribusiness. And this takes me to a situation which is interesting. The other day, there was another researchers who translate this as a kind of, as if though you were putting a luxury condominium inside a slum, inside a favela. Brazil has a lot of this sort of combination. Very wealthy neighborhoods surrounded by very poor neighborhoods. So you're going to create specific niches in the Amazon that will be totally under control. They will move forward even beyond what Brazilian laws establish. 5 or 6 companies said that they will achieve zero deforestation by 2030. So these companies will not buy any products coming for illegal deforestation. This is already happening right now. And so this is the mindset of creating your own condominium. But what happens on the outside? What happens in regions where there is no safety or environmental awareness or any of that? You know, that the surroundings of these companies, and this is a big part of the production, only 20% of Brazilian meat and poultry is exported. Most of the meat remains in Brazil. So what happens with all the rest that are not following all these ESG issues? So this is something that we have to deal with. So 3 ESG criteria by establishing dialogues with other countries, we will be able to come to a solution. Now, what about Europe? Europe is no longer Brazil's biggest client. In fact, exports to Europe dropped significantly in terms of our business exports. I will show you some numbers in this respect, and I was quite impressed when I saw these numbers. So today, in the case of Europe, exports to Europe dropped. In 2000, Europe accounted for 40% of Brazilian agribusiness exports. Europe was our biggest clients at the time. All the negotiations at that time are focused on what will Europe do. We sold basically to Rotterdam and to other European ports. Now, today, Europe accounts for 16% only of Brazilian agribusiness exports. These exports have dropped year by year. We exported $25 billion. Now we're exporting $16 billion. So our exports is concentrated on 4 or 5 commodities, basically meat, sugar, soybeans, orange, and coffee. So these are the products that we sell. And in terms of all these products, Europe is no longer the biggest client. Maybe not in terms of coffee, but the other 4 that I mentioned, Europe is no longer accounts for such high figures. 70% of Brazilian soybeans went to Europe in the year 2000, and now only less than 20% of the soybeans go to Europe. So Europe is no longer important as the destination. But Europe gains importance in terms of opinion makers. And this is a very critical issue, and it's very important that we reflect on this. Europe approved the so-called Green Deal. The Americans are going in the same direction, as is China. So Europe was a pioneer in this respect of trying to build up a pact, a European pact, focusing on rules for the green economy. China is doing the same, and now the United States, under Biden, is going in the same direction. This will create a new front, Asian, European, and American, at the World Trade Organization, and all of this, motivating adjustments. They're saying, for example, about eliminating products from deforested areas. Last week, I was talking to our Minister of Agriculture about the conference that will take place at FAO on food systems, which is a new look at these older concepts. And at this conference, the focus will be agriculture, health, food, and the environment. Health now is a very crucial issue because of the COVID. And all of this in an agenda that will attack countries that are involved in deforesting. The ESG criteria is a new way of looking at something that has always been in the spotlight. So Europe is the great motivator of this agenda. And therefore, as I see it, we have to do a work where we have to do our homework, of course, and upon doing our homework, this entails public policies and forest code and bioeconomics, monitoring, traceability, and so on. So all these areas that I mentioned here, Brazil has to be able to improve its dialogue with Europe and focus on certain opportunities in niches that exist in the European market. We have great opportunities in terms of aggregated value products. That's what Luis said. We don't have any major brand in Europe. We don't have an orange juice brand or a coffee brand or a meat, but we don't have Brazilian multinationals. So Europe is the place to test all these distinct products that have a strong brand, that have aggregate value. So this is a very interesting effort of the commercial areas of companies. And this effort has to come together with the effort of ensuring products that come from legal areas and nothing that comes from illegally deforested areas. So I think there are huge opportunities out there. I think there's another huge opportunity that's always there, and it's even more existing now in terms of Brazil being the solution, and this I'm saying, talking specifically about renewable energies, ethanol, sugarcane ethanol, biodiesel. So Brazil has a lot of experience in this respect, which are the root of the solution for the global climate change problem. Let's think of the land use, where we are seen as villains because of deforesting, but all of this represents 6% of the emissions of the planet. 70% of the emissions that a planet undergoes is energy and transportation. So this is an area where Brazil has solutions and not problems, because our energy matrix is renewable. It's much more sustainable than the European energy matrix or the Chinese or American energy matrix. So in my opinion, we have to work on these new agendas and focusing on products that have this differentiation, that ensure the consumers that the characteristics that consumers want are there. And the most visible place to do this is Germany, the UK, and Northern European countries. And this is why these 2 days will be so interesting, because this is an opportunity of having a conversation about these opportunities. Okay, thank you very much for this opportunity. And it's always a great honor to be participating in LIDE events.
Thank you, Marcos. You really touch in topics that were very important. This negative evolution during those last 20 years, having Europe as a client dropped from a percentage that dominated with 40%, and you said that imports dropped to 16% today. So actually something impressive. And it's very pertinent what you said, that Brazil, with all the agricultural and cattle raising aspects, are should be focused in order to do a very good marketing campaign with very positive characteristics that Brazil has specifically in this area. So without further ado, I'm going to give the floor to the next speaker, where we have all the reforestation, which is the next panel. Thank you, André, for the introduction. Thank you, Marcos Yank, as well as Minister Furlan, for these classes that you gave us. We're starting our panel about reforestation. I'd like to ask our participants to send us their questions. And I'd like to welcome all my colleagues and participants and the moderator, Dr. Hildegard Stausberg, correspondent of Latin America in Die Welt newspaper, and our guests that I'm going to introduce now. Gilberto Göller, founder, CEO of Girasol Group, Administração and Participação Limitada. He is an entrepreneur in the Brazilian agribusiness with important participation in genetics and grains. And he was a senator of the Brazilian Republic during 2 years, a representative of the Mato Grosso state, and also was ex-president of producer of soybean and cotton, director of TC, Association of Companies of Transportation of Cargo and Transmat, and vice president of the Brazilian Association of Seedlings, and also vice president of Abrasoba and director of AMPA, the cotton area. I'd like to welcome you, Mr. Gilberto, as well as like to welcome Fausto Takiwawa, forest engineer from the Luiz de Queiroz School of Agriculture, Exalc USP in 1995. He was president of the Association of Reforesters of the state of Mato Grosso Agrofloresta between 2020 and 2016. He was honored as outstanding executive at the 2016 Timber Congress, and he has secretary of Agrofloresta and technical director of the Association of Forest Engineers. I welcome Mr. Fausto Takizawa. Now, in a connection with what said Marcos Yanko with our project, with our panel on reforestation, FAO, the food of the United States, and Marcos Yanko has also mentioned, said in the study that 5.2 million hectares of forest had been lost in the last few years. However, we are in a better position in terms of figures, just 4.7 million. So I'd like now to ask, and these figures are a bit better because of the reforestation that is growing. My questions to the participants, to the speakers is, why are you in this sector, and what are the challenges? How can you manage this, solve these problems, and what are the opportunities that can come for the companies who would like to work in this segment? So I give the floor to Mr. Gilberto. You're mute. You're on mute, Gilberto Göller. Well, Fausto wanted to start the presentation because I would prefer to talk about the agro industry. Fausto, I give you the floor.
Boa tarde ou bom dia para todos.
Well, good afternoon or good morning, according to the place where we are in the world. I'd like to thank the invitation. I've been working for 25 years in ECA and in the state of Mato Grosso. One of the questions, what is the objective of Brazil in the private sector in the area of reforestation? Before answering the question, we should understand what is reforestation. When we talk about reforestation, we have two kinds of reforestation. One of them is for ecological aspects and conservationists, preservationists, and this is focused on the native species. And the other one has to do for commercial purposes and economic purposes for the production of goods and timber, especially. And timber, just to simplify our conversation here, when we talk about reforestation for commercial purposes, I'd say plantation. And the other one, what is the strategy that we have in terms of the Brazilian territory for each one of reforestation? Brazil has actually strategy for each kind of reforestation. The reforestation, the plantation of trees. We have a program that's called Plantar Florestas, which is planting forests, under the responsibility of the Ministry of Agriculture, Minister Teresa Cristina. There was a big participation of the private sector. I would say that this program not only traduces what is the vision of the Brazilian government, but also of the private sector. We have associations. The Embrapa Floresta has a big participation as well. Reforestation for the purpose of preservation is PLANAVEG, National Plan of the Native Vegetation Recovery. This program is under the responsibility of the Ministry of Environment, and in order to recover a great deal of hectares up to 2030. 1 million and so by year until 2030. But today, I'm going to focus on the Plantar Florestas program, the plantation of trees, which is the focus that myself and Gilberto Göllner are in. This Plantar Florestas program has the objective to increase the productivity of trees plantation in the country, to foster the production of goods and services of the sector. And when we talk about services, this includes the payment of machines and instruments, the carbon aspect, to contribute to reduce the pressure on a native forests, improve the earnings, and also focusing on the small and medium properties and the integration between rural producers, the industry, and the agri-industry. This is the goal of planting forest project that was made with the private sector. And why? Because we understood that it was necessary to have a strategy for that. So to answer why, I'm going to present you some figures of this program in Brazil. In 2019, the tree plantation accounted for 1.2 billion of the 97% of earnings in 2019. In 2019, we had 12.6% higher than 2018. It occupies only 1% of the Brazilian territory and supplying 90% of all the timber for industrial purposes in Brazil, generates 3.7 million of direct employments and indirect as well. For each hectare of a tree plantation, the sector has 0.7 that are preserved in the native forests and legal preservation areas, as well as other from the native that are. And it's a sector that have been investing in socio-environmental actions, 18 million reais, benefiting 6.9 million people. Until up to 2023, these sectors will invest 25 millions in investments in factories, in formation of new forests, and maintaining those that are present. In 2021, the sector announced, the Brazilian Association made a study, and in January, with all the vacancies of employment in this sector, 4,000 vacancies in February 2021, in a moment that we're living, let's say, a pandemic here, because we're very, and the municipalities where tree plantation is a highlight had an improvement in terms of IDH. In the municipality where the tree plantation is big, we had a growing of 36%, but 47% is the average index in Brazil. Well, taking into account this rationale of sustainable production, the tree forest has 20 million certified trees that are certified, environmental certification, 10 millions of hectares that are planted in Brazil, 40% of the area that is planted, and we have many companies as well that are in the process of certification. So there is a trend of growing in this area, and this is really something important for Brazil. Those 10 millions of hectares stock approximately roughly 2 billions of tons of equivalent carbon, and 7 millions of hectares represent 3 billion in terms of tons of carbon stock equivalents. And besides, there is a study that was conducted by Embrapa. When you use this timber for the construction in woods, for houses, for furnitures, the carbon is not only stocked in the forest, but you have a carbon that is stocked for a longer period, for 1 century or even more than 1 century. And if you use the timber as energy, as a source of energy, such timber will save 1.1 million tons of equivalent carbon by ton of timber that you use as energy. Well, now in terms of economy of lands, as said Marcos, Brazil is a champion in productivity of eucalyptus, an average of 37 cubic meter up to 40 cubic meter by hectare. So the production of timber per hectare is a champion. Brazil is a champion. And also teca, my specialty, TIC, is 15 cubic meter per hectare. This is one of the highest productivity in terms of TIC plantation. These are the figures of this sector that makes Brazil a country that is very attractive for those who want to invest in forests based on these figures, and also in terms of availability of lands, and also in terms of know-how. All the know-how with the highlight of production of eucalyptus for pulp, and Pinus, TIC also has paved its way for eucalyptus in this kind of technology in terms of production. State of the art. Thank you very much. What are the challenges that you see in this sector? In order to certify, what are the today's challenges of reforestation in Brazil?
So the challenges of today in this Planta program, we identified 9 issues that have to be dealt with. we have to, these are the challenges. These are our challenges. So they are the institutional issues of the planted forest, because the planting of trees with productive purposes is very often confused with the purpose being conservation. So there's a confusion in this respect. Now with the locus exists, it is part of the Ministry of Agriculture, it is part of the Forest Institute of Brazil. So we have information. Planted forest in Brazil has, we have to identify where it lies. How many hectares are there? The inventory, the geographical localization of this inventory. This kind of diagnosis has to be conducted, and of course, we have to monitor all these advances. So we need strategic information. This is information which is not all consolidated in its totality. So you have to move forward in this respect. But we're doing this. The Ministry of Agriculture is doing this with the help of all the state authorities. And then we have demand for forest products, which is another factor. And when we talk about biomass, Mrs. Gilberto will go into more detail about biomass for energy, but the state of Mato Grosso has a huge demand, as has agribusiness, as has corn crops. There's a huge demand for eucalyptus. So in terms of biomass, we might have a very interesting synergy with Europe, because when we talk about biomass, it's timber for logs and chips for energy. But when we talk about energy in Europe, you can transform timber in pellets, in wood pellets. In this way, you aggregate value to this timber, and Europe under this green the deal agreement. So we are part of the solution for Europe in this respect, because we can supply this part of this clean energy and timber for civil construction. So Europe, especially Germany, is our big example of wood constructions, and Brazil is going in this direction in terms of civil construction takes use up a lot of carbon. So Brazil, a huge producer of raw materials to move forward in this respect, not only in Brazil but also in Europe, and in terms of becoming a supplier of timber, of engineered timber, not raw timber, but engineered timber. So Brazil can become a great supplier. And in terms of cultivating planted forests, the objective of Plantar Floresta is to expand 2 million by 2 million hectares by 2030. This means plant approximately 233,000 hectares until 2030. And this requires 1.5 billion of reals per year in investing to form a forest. And this resource, forest demands, is very capital intensive in the beginning, because the return on income does not take less than 7 years, and Brazil does not have a culture investing in this kind of sector, and Europeans do so, because Europeans see this as a long-term investment. So this is a role that Brazil has to start playing, especially abroad. This issue of attracting capital expand its forests, and there are other issues such as research and development, innovations in planted forests, logistics and infrastructure is another issue that Marcos Young already mentioned. Legal issues, just to give an example, the legal issue, planting trees in Brazil is still under a old-fashioned laws, because the law says that planting trees has a medium-sized impact on pollution in the environment. So Embrapa has conducted a study that, on the contrary, planting trees, obeying all the legal issues, aggregates value to the environment. So our old-fashioned laws in this respect have to be restated. Another issue, the protection of the forests. So we have to have fertilizers and other agricultural products that have to be registered and used by authorities to protect the forests against plagues and so on. And the last issue is communication and commercial promotion. Brazil is still not familiar with how planting trees is part of anybody's daily lives. But because this is not only in terms of trees themselves, but we even eat wood, just to give you an idea, in ice cream, for example. So nowadays, the state-of-the-art technology has biorefineries where it is possible to substitute many oil byproducts. These can be substituted by wood. For example, there are many clothes where the basic raw material is wood. So society in general, it does not know all these factors. So, as I said, timber and wood has so many uses that people are not familiar with. So there are many products that can substitute all these products that are based on fossil fuels. Thank you, Celso, for this overview, this very interesting overview that you just talked about here. And in this last topic that you mentioned is totally related to the circular economy, right? Because circular economy, reforesting and pulp and paper is a great example of the circular economy. And now I'm going to go to industry to talk to Mr. Gilberto.
It's a pleasure to be with all of you. I'd like to welcome especially Luis Furlan, Marcos Young, Guilherme Nolasco, Evandro, as people that we have known for a long time, of events that we conducted here in the state of Mato Grosso. Within this part, I'd like to talk about the opportunity that exists today in the state of Mato Grosso, my state, to plant trees, eucalyptus trees, with a maturation age in terms of investment from 6 to 7 years. And today we have a marketplace and also new markets that are opening for the consumption of such timber. This is a marketplace that has existing today, is to transform the eucalyptus in biomass, in cavaco, and through machines that do this, and to supply the ethanol plants, maize or corn ethanol. This is a market that is competing and that gave the possibility of all the forests that were planted, and they had not an economic purpose that was already engaged. But with these new investments of the chairman of a company that calls Eucaege, idealized a big pulp and plant near to the states of Goiás and Mato Grosso do Sul, in a region with railway infrastructure, with logistics, and operates the harbor of Santos, the port of Santos. And we have an area that is available to plant 500,000 hectares of eucalyptus with a low, well, it was a special low fertility for other use of grain plantation. This is an area with a very low value, areas with a degraded pasture, not well used, and without any significant economic value. So we, in the first step, the first stage of the plant of 2 million pulp and paper production, and for 180,000 hectares, we need 300,000 in a total area. And only 60%, roughly, is allocated to the effective use. So the 60% of plantation, 300,000, we are talking about 180,000 hectares that will be planted during a period of 7 years to consecutive production and use of the plant. This is a plant that will produce pulp and paper, white fiber, short white fiber, with all the possibilities to compete as one of the most efficient and best plants of the world, of the country. We have many people interested. We are at a stage, we have an installation license that was already approved. We have a site that was already approved. And we have some investors that are interested and that are now, after the pandemic, are interested in starting to invest. So this is an investment of $2.5 billion that was allocated to this plant. The project was conducted by a company of technology, POI, an international company that is specialized in the area of pulp and paper. We have all the conditions to, in order to attract investors for the plantation of such forests. Today, we need investors to come with a capital to invest, to produce planted forests for such plants. We had a blackout, as to say, in the state of Mato Grosso do Sul, which is another state that is consuming a great deal of timber from eucalyptus because of the plants. We have Suzano, Klabin, Eldorado, big companies in Brazil. So today, we must renew the plantation because those that are existing today are not supplying the necessary demand for such plants. Thus, I'd like to invest the investors to come to know our project, Euca Energy, so to see the possibility of take part as investors in the eucalyptus plantation or in the plant itself. So this is a sole opportunity, and we are selling this project to the investors to have a full participation. But there is also the possibility of attracting companies necessary for the plantation of eucalyptus of 100,000 hectares, a project in terms of replication in 7 years. 28,000 hectares of plantation per year. So this is what I had to present to you, and this is an opportunity, a great opportunity. This is a business that is not only paperwork, it's something that is close to be executed, and we have all the conditions to become one of the companies most effective and doubling the eucalyptus area, and thus we can double the plant production, go to 4 million tons. It was a great pleasure to take part, and we're conducting this project for 5 years now, and now we conclude it, and we have the approved license. So we complied with all the stages, the steps, the impact. This is part of the opportunities that we have to offer in order to close this project as a whole.
So these extraordinary numbers, and talking about this project, Mr. Gilberto, The challenges, I think, there was quite a number of challenges, weren't there, until you were able to get all the licenses and the necessary authorizations to have a business such as yours, because this is not easy in Brazil. Yes, we went through everything, and the plant will co-generate energy in the amount of 300 megas, and so the income will also come from this energy supply, together with the pulp and paper operation. So half of the energy will be used at the plant, the other half of the energy will be sold. So this is highly a profitable business, and so we see that the planted forest sector has enormous opportunities in the states of Mato Grosso and Mato Grosso do Sul. And there are extra possibilities as well, right? Yes, once again, these investors will export this cellulose that will come from the plant. So to supply the paper companies that they own abroad. Now, going now to international issues, I would like to invite our dear Hildegard Stausberg to give her opinion on this panel and everything that this panel has that is related to the foreign market.
¿Me puede escuchar? Agora sim.
Can you hear me? Yes, we can hear you now. Thank you. To begin with,
I'm really very impressed to start with all the data that we could receive until today in terms of macro and macro and microeconomic. This gives me the feeling that actually all that has to do with reforestation is a topic that much interests Germany a great deal, with all this tradition that we have in this area. What I can see, it's an enormous, huge topic of communication. And after having heard all the figures, the successes, and I ask myself, how can we communicate this in an environment where I have the feeling that it is becoming more critical as the time goes on, because in Brazil, because of the question, the issue of Amazon and of this president, but especially because there is a problem of communication, a total lack of communication. Brazil is experiencing a sensational, a very good time, and perhaps we're not seeing it in Europe, or perhaps we don't want to see it. Now, why? This, I don't know. It's a huge topic, I should admit. Mr. Fausto and his data are absolutely incredible, as well as the integration of the ecological factor exists. My question to you both is, what are the contacts that you have with all the ecological aspects of deforestation in Germany?
Deixa eu ver se eu entendi a pergunta, doutora Hildegard.
Let me, well, correct me if I didn't understand your question. However, we see this as well. It's really a big problem of communication. These figures are not mine, but they are supplied by the Timber Association, and within the project of Plantar Florestas, we had a big role of Embrapa Forests, the state associations. we had, let's say, a taste of each one of the states so as to help this project, this program. Actually, the productive area of tree plantation, we have a strong correlation with the reforestation for ecological purposes, because the sector comes with a mindset of 40% of the sector has an environmental certification. So this is growing. And since we work for export products, we should have a policy that is well aligned with the most advanced rules. And in terms of this environmental topic, we understand that there are many ecological services that go beyond the forests. And well, what is the correlation with Germany? Today, this sector, in a macro aspect, has not an agenda yet, an agenda in jurisdictional, and each company has its strategy in order to leverage funds, and having the communication where we can find communication to leverage the project Suzano, for instance, Green Bonds and Klabin, the examples of Brazil, Suzano and Klabin in this area of green bonds. Each company has its strategy. Those who are working in the state of Mato Grosso, a state that has a program that is called PCI. This state is trying to be the leader in terms of these gains, and also negotiate this among the sources of green bonds. Mato Grosso accomplished some partnerships with German companies in the PCI project, which I talked about, Dr. Hildegard. Another question, how is the Chinese with this sector in Brazil nowadays? Perhaps I'd like to address this question to Mr. Gilberto. China is investing in this sector in Brazil already, or not for the time being? No, not yet. No investments of Chinese groups for the time being. We have been talking with many groups, Chinese as well. These are economic groups, industries, companies that are interested in taking part. And the priority is to have Brazilian partners, so they can have a partnership and plant forests and having participation in the lands with a lower capital, and the most part of the investment should be from a Brazilian investor. So this is a market that is still beginning, and they want to come to Brazil. It's going to be a big opportunity, and they will be welcome. Excuse me to interrupt you, but we're concluding our reforestation panel. We obtained some important information for our participants, and we're open to questions, and we can resume our conversation through the chat. Now I'd like to call, thank you everyone. Now I call the next panel, Evandro Cesar, chairman of LIDE Mato Grosso, to be the moderator of the next panel.
Thank you, Fabiana. Good afternoon. Yes, we could say much more about these issues on this first panel, but it's so good that we have all these topics to talk about. This is just the first meeting. I am Evandro Cesar, and the president of LIDE Mato Grosso, and I'm responsible for the coordination together with Mrs. Strasberg of the second panel. This is initiative of the Mato Grosso, Paraná, UK, and Germany units, and we're going to talk specifically about biofuels. To those, please be brief and please tell us about your expertise, but please be brief in your presentations. So to moderate this panel, we have Dr. Stausberg, the first journalist that was honored with the Brazil Germany Journalism Award. It's an honor to be with you together, Doctor. Our speakers are Professor Plinio Nastadi, Master and Doctor in Agricultural Economy. He's a professor at the FGV Institute São Paulo. He's also chairman of several associations. He sits on several boards of several institutions, president of the Brazilian Institute of Bioenergy and Bioeconomy. Rafael Abus, CEO of FSB Energia. He has a degree in business administration from FAPI, more than 15 years of experience in management and development of renewable energy products, member of the board of the National Organization of Corn Ethanol, and is also prominent in other ethanol organizations. Guilherme Nolasco, CEO of the also another National Association of Corn Ethanol, a very prominent figure in the agribusiness sector. He also sits on a number of other associations. So these were just brief CVs of each of our panelists. I would like to thank the support of LIDE Mato Grosso, the institutional support of the institutions that you see on the screen. Now I will turn the mic over to our speakers so that we take full advantage of the time that we have to allow our panelists to talk about their experiences. I would like to provoke the three of you, and in a very broad way, I would like to say that about the main challenges for the production and the use of biofuels, not only in Brazil, but in Europe and in the world as a whole. I would like to share with you the space with you, with Mr. Nastadi, Nolasco, and please feel free to begin this conversation with us. So please feel free to do so. So please feel free. Professor Plinio, if you would like to start, it would be great. Thank you very much to our moderator. Mr. Evandro says that it's a great pleasure to be part of this event. I would like to extend my welcome to Mr. Furlan, Mr. Cariopa, to the speakers who came before me, and I would also like to greet my fellow panel members. I think Brazil has a lot to say about bioenergy and biofuels specifically. In this dialogue with the European Union, especially Germany, Brazil developed in the last 4 or 5 decades, Brazil developed a very successful program for biofuels through which resulted in bioethanol and biodiesel, and more recently, biogas and biomethane. And biokerosene was something that will come up soon as well. And not only in terms of scale and volume, Brazil is substituting 47% of its gasoline with ethanol, is substituting 12% of its diesel with biofuel, and there's a huge potential for biogas and biomethane, which is equivalent to 44% of the diesel consumption in Brazil. This is more than 100 million cubic meters per day of biogas, which comes from organic waste, which is equivalent to more than 3 months of the capacity of the Brazil-Bolivia oil pipeline. And above all of this is sustainable, and it's becoming more and more sustainable after the approval and implementation of the law of the Renova Bio, which is a national plan of biofuels, which establishes a regulatory framework and motivates increased efficiency. So energy efficiency, which should lead to the increase of productivity, cost reduction, and lower prices for consumers, lower fuel prices for consumers. But above all, technology, which is very dense in terms of energy and has a very small carbon footprint. The sugarcane ethanol substitutes 91% of the greenhouse gases from gasoline, and very soon this is all going in the direction of substituting 100% or more than 100%, and will become a carbon sink in terms of the rules of life cycle. What does all of this mean? It means that we have an energy for transportation, which is very clean and uses existing infrastructure, so there is no need to use or build up a new infrastructure, and which allows the use of this energy in different ways of motorizing, whether it's through internal combustion engines or whether it's through different ways of electrification that can be in the form of hybrid vehicles, through fuel cells, because electrification is a tendency because it's a more efficient motorization than with internal combustion engines. So this is all an experience that can be scaled up and replicated in other countries. And this is already happening in various countries of Asia, Latin America. So it has a huge potential in Africa, and I believe that this experience undoubtedly will be complemented by other initiatives that are being developed at the moment in Europe and in the United States and in other countries around the world. So this is an area where Brazil has a lot to contribute to. Ethanol, it does not only come from sugarcane, it comes from corn as well. In the last 5 years, corn ethanol, the production went up from 100 million cubic meters into this last harvest, which, and I think Rafael and Guilherme mentioned this already, but there's more than 2.7 billion liters of corn ethanol, and we're doubling and tripling this volume with enormous generation of aggregated value, multiplying the value of the grain, bringing decentralized economic development, and making feasible to intensify cattle raising, and as a result, reducing the use of pastures for the production of the same quantity of meat. And so this is what I wanted to say, and I would like now to hand the microphone to my fellow panel members, and thank you all for listening to me.
We thank you, Mr. Plinio. Rafael would like to take the floor. Be welcome. Thank you, Evandro. Thank you for the invitation to take part in this panel, to be with you. I also would like to welcome the other panel members, Furlan, Yang, Plinio, Guilherme, that are here with us. I'd like to comment some aspects. We talked about very many topics. The debate about the climate change. We talked about productivity, aggregation of value, adding value, the use of lands. Marcos talked about this, also about reforestation in the other panel, supply chain, clean supply chains in terms of the different projects, and everything that is the core and the debate of the climate change and farming and agro-industrial production. We had the happiness of reunite all these elements in our productive chain and maximize the positive aspect of all these issues in this chain. I'd like to share with you the maize or corn ethanol production, which is very new in Brazil. Plinio talked about the sugar cane. Is a great experience. We have 90% of all the Brazilian ethanol based on sugar cane, and corn is a productive aspect in Brazil, recent in Brazil. So the first topic that made it feasible, made this corn ethanol in Brazil was the farming revolution that was mentioned by Ianco in the first panel. In Mato Grosso, with the two crops in the same year, the climate allowed this, and also the equipment, adopting new technologies and modern technologies allowed this. So corn experienced in the last few years an enormous productivity and total production in the state of Mato Grosso, making feasible this. So what lacked was liquidity in terms of the bottleneck of technology in Brazil in order to send all this production through the state of Mato Grosso to the harbors, and this the growing production and the farming revolution in the fields. So we have a model that copying the United States by transforming the different adding value products, animal production, such as selected ones, special ones of high protein, corn oil for different diets, in different animal for production for swines and poultry and so on. And this is different from the American model. All our generation of energy comes from planted forests. Almost all of them have this specific purpose today. And reforestation was mentioned today. This is a source of energy so as to generate labor and energy for our plants. So we combine the Brazilian experience, sugarcane that contributed a great deal, the bagasse and corn. We do not have any bagasse, so have to take into account all these forests. This American model, the shock of productivity and revolution that occurred in the field, increasing the competitiveness of corn combined with the reforestation, transformed this in a very an excellent model in terms of sustainability. So just to give you, to provide some figures, in the Renewable program, our company FS, which is the sole representative in this kind of business, is the first with a best mark, lower print of carbon. And this is because this business model, and having this into perspective, and all the data from the American model of biofuels of the state of California, the intensity of carbon of our business model, more specifically, is 66% lower than the American corn ethanol, 42% lower than the sugarcane, Brazilian sugarcane ethanol in the Californian program, and is 25% more effective in carbon of the electric cars of California. And in the United States, with this is one of the very clean matrix. We have today a solution in Brazil that combines all the process of sustainability, productivity, adding value, effective use of lands, and to produce a low print ethanol. And our company is a new company, has 3.5 years of existence and history in this operation, but it's a company that has been growing very quickly. Largest ethanol producer, 3.4 billion of capacity in 12 industrial units. We want to expand and occupying this space to add value in the state of Mato Grosso. So all this energy transition that was mentioned before, we have to look forward. RenovaBio is very interesting. The Californian program is another example. The world today has 60 carbon programs that prices carbon with a voluntary market, specific markets for biofuels, 64 according to the World Bank, and a large variety of pricing. We have carbon from $4 or $5, $6 in RenovaBio today, up to $200 in the Californian market. We have an average of this of $40 for tons of carbon. The example of the Brazil potential that is larger than our platform, according to the examples that we saw today. Carbon credit in scale to take advantage of and playing an important role in this process of energy. One of the topic, as said Plinio, about negative carbon. We have many examples in the sugarcane area. We have some initiative in which we are working on in the same direction. One of the projects that we conducted today in high feasibility to sequestration of carbon, we made a geological analysis of the region, and we were benefited by we have rocks that were located under the plants in order to have the sequestration of carbon. This is a topic that we could talk a little bit about later, and I'll conclude and give the floor to Guilherme in order to get deeper in this topic. Thank you.
Thank you, Rafael. Guilherme. Thank you, Evandro, for inviting me to join this event. Now all of these professors are a hard act to follow because I will probably be redundant in relation to all the issues that were addressed. Corn ethanol is multiplying year by year. And just to complement what Rafael and Plinio said, we still use, although we produce 7-8% of the total ethanol in Brazil, we use only 6% of the available corn. 6% is nothing, but in the next 8 years, Brazil should grow to the tune of 50 million tons of corn production through efficiency gains and productive gains. We have an average of 120 bags of corn per hectare in 2 harvests, and we can achieve 180 to 200 bags of corn per hectare. So have this enormous capacity to grow in terms of corn production, and this will lead to the growth in the production of biofuel and corn-based ethanol without affecting food safety, because 80% of the processed corn goes back to animal feed, and which is used to feed cattle, and there's a huge gap in terms of productivity and corn ethanol will surf on this wave in a couple of years. And we expect to achieve 20% of corn-based ethanol in Brazil. But to move on, I would like to provoke you and Plínio and Rafael, and based on what you three said, Rafael mentioned that we are going through an energy transition. We're moving towards renewable energy, and in this respect, it is totally aligned with the global agency of the United States, thanks to the fact that President Biden is going back to this agenda. China has announced the addition of ethanol, a 20% ethanol to its fuel, and there's a huge market to be explored in terms of substituting fuel fossils with biofuel. So Plínio, how do you see the role of ethanol and biofuels in this global agenda, which is so in the spotlight? People are talking about electric cars, and people talk about substituting fossil fuels. What can we achieve in all of this? What is the role that biofuels and ethanol can play in all of this? And the question is, are we prepared to meet the demands of this global market in this respect? Thank you, Guilherme, for your question. I would like to say hello to Rafael and you as well, and all of my panel member colleagues. Ethanol is very interesting because it is a liquid fuel with high energy density and uses its existing infrastructure and will live and be part of these mobility solutions. It will live together with other solutions. So the whole issue is that when you talk about electrification, and normally one confuses electrification with a aspect of electrification, which is electrification based on batteries. Batteries is something that stores energy. It's not the energy itself. Batteries only store energy. It's as if we were comparing batteries to a fuel tank. Ethanol can be used for electrification as well. We have electrification based on liquid biofuels, and ethanol is very beneficial from the point of view of global emissions and local emissions. In terms of global greenhouse gas emissions, electrification with ethanol is the only one that is able to meet the limits already defined to be complied with from 2032 onwards in Europe, which are the ones that are strictest. So the internal combustion engine nowadays, using ethanol, generates emissions of 58 grams of CO2 equivalent per kilometer. In 2032, these 58 grams will drop to 36 to 37 grams. Nowadays, we already have electric vehicles, the hybrid ones that use ethanol and that emit only 29 grams of CO2 per kilometer. And nowadays, the limit of emissions that has to be complied with in Europe corresponds to 95 grams. The average of the car assemblers in Europe are emitting 127 grams, and the electric car run on batteries using average electricity in Europe is emitting 92 grams. So it would be necessary in Europe, it would be necessary for 100% of the fleet would be run on batteries to meet the requirements defined for now, for the present. How much of the current sales correspond to electric cars? 2.2% only. 58% of the vehicles are still run on gasoline. 39% run on diesel. And therefore, there's still a long way to go by various countries to achieve what Brazil has achieved in terms of ethanol. I'm talking about global emissions. Thanks to this flex vehicles in Brazil is emitting much lower gas emissions. In terms of local emissions, this is measured by the air quality index, by the particulate material of 2.5 micrometers. The 50 most polluted cities in the world have indexes of particulate matter that varies from 100 to 140 micrograms per cubic meter of air. So this is the case of New Delhi, Beijing, another of these 50 cities, 25 of the most polluted cities are in India, 22 are in China, 2 in Bangladesh, and 1 in Pakistan. Among 100 and 140 grams of microparticles. What is the position of São Paulo, a city of more than 20 million inhabitants and more than 8.5 million vehicles? São Paulo ranks 187 as the most polluted city in the world, with an index of only 16 microns per cubic meter of air. And this is why in our cities, we do not have the same level of pollution. And this is so important in this environment of the pandemics caused by a virus, which is a lung disease, which is worsened by atmosphere conditions. So when we talk about sustainable energy, when we talk about health, when we talk about the environment, what Brazil is doing in this respect, it is integrating energy agriculture and food agriculture, leveraging and generating aggregated value, transforming and multiplying the value of corn, thanks to this conversation and this virtuous industrialization. And Brazil is doing the same thing with sugarcane, with industrial waste. And so this is Brazil is an example for the world. It's an example of the production of sustainable protein using all these resources that I just mentioned. So there's a lot going on here. There's still a lot to do in terms of integration and exchanging experiences in this respect, not only with the European Union, and this is taking place at the moment with India, China, Pakistan, Thailand, Indonesia, and other countries. Thank you, Plínio. Professor Plínio, thank you very much. Now, let's listen to our European representative, Dr. Stalsberg. Please, you have the microphone. Dr. Stalsberg.
Nós não estamos ouvindo, está sem som.
We can't hear you. I think you're on mute. Can you hear me now? Yes. Again, I'm very impressed. And again, a bit unhappy, and more than unhappy, because of the lack of communication about what you do as in terms of the international arena. Well, Plínio, I understood, and I don't understand. I have no knowledge about techniques and technology. We should send him from one city to another in Europe. This is incredible. But if this is incredible and we do not know it, this cannot improve the position of Brazil worldwide. So I'd like to repeat what I said previously. What you need urgently is to bring all these success histories and cut them in pieces and make people understand and communicate this worldwide. I have the feeling that Brazil is in a productive revolution, and here in Europe, we do not see this, we do not understand it. Everyone is talking about Amazon and that you are destructing Amazon. This is the sole and the only topic that we're talking in Brazil. I'm not the Virgin of Guadeloupe that could change everything, but I'd like to be. Before, I would have the need that a campaign of a very serious campaign of information, not about advertising, but very short, well done and positive information, and it should be convincing.
I am really unhappy in the sense that I see what you do and I see what we do not understand and what we do not see what you do. Es lo que veo.
It's what I see. If you allow me, Dr. Stausberg, I'd like to add that everything that is occurring and that is being certified in a voluntary way within the rules of Renovable, this plan about what we're talking about, more than 90% of the production of biofuel is already certified according to the rules of Coronaville, and this meets the eligibility criteria that is very strict. The raw material for production of biofuels cannot come from areas that were deforested. So all the production of biofuel is being certified by satellites, by inspection companies such as SGS, as well as other companies, and the raw material does not come from deforested areas. So it's genuinely a production of bioenergy that is sustainable, which can be monitored in a very effective way. I drive a car, this ethanol hybrid that has 29 grams compared to 124 average in Europe. So people really must know that. So there is a lack of information and communication. Just a question to all of you, perhaps. The ecological aspect is today a political issue. This is used against Brazil. However, it is possible that some policies or sectors in Brazil support this current that is against the government for political reasons. Sometimes I have this feeling. How do you see that? How do you envisage this? Yeah, it's true. This is my opinion as well. I think that there is a not necessary and very dangerous politicization. A great part of this discussion and debate occurs because of reasons that are not related to agribusiness, the professional agribusiness as it exists in Brazil. Perhaps this is a big victim of this process. I see that Professor Marcos Ianco wants to say something. Is it possible? Please, you have the floor. You can open your microphone.
Okay, I hope that you can hear me. Yes, we can hear you perfectly. I'm just going to plug into the right mic. Yeah, we can hear you. We can hear you. Yes, thank you. Okay, just a comment on this issue of communication, because I have spoken at various forums that I took part in. Brazil has to change the tone. It has to change the record. And I'm referring specifically to organized companies and the most serious associations that exist in Brazil. I think it's very unproductive to praise ourselves with arrogance, as sometimes happens. But, you know, we're the most sustainable country in the world, the biggest country in the world, and so on. This kind of conversation is a lack of modesty that we should try and correct, as we know that we have here a huge problem to be solved. And until we solve these problems, we will not be the most sustainable country in the world. You know, the deforestation issues, the forest code, and so on. The same thing holds true in relation to how to have this conversation. So I think propaganda, especially government propaganda, has no efficiency whatsoever abroad. People don't even look at it. So what we need is to have more dialogue. Need to have more information. As Dr. Strasberg said, we have to take this information in English. I see people spending days and days speaking Portuguese, but we have to speak in English and or other European languages. And provide this information in different languages, but do this through the dialogue and not only send a video or anything, but we have to actually participate of the debates that are going on. And the important role to play, it belongs to the trade associations. We do not have this international presence. I spent 10 years abroad, and I can say that I did not see Brazil present physically anywhere, with the exception of the Itamaraty, the Foreign Affairs Office. So very few Brazilian associations are present and acting or active in the European scenario. There's something going on in Brussels, but nothing else going on in the member states of the European Union. This has to be a broad dialogue, a patient dialogue. It's a long dialogue. We have to have a mapping of the stakeholders, see who our allies are, and we have to have a physical presence abroad. I think this agenda that was mentioned by Plinio, and which we all support, this should be the #1 agenda of our dialogue with countries abroad, because energy is the #1 problem of climate change. So I think we really have to embrace this agenda and take it out in a more organized manner. This is what I wanted to say. Thank you, Marcos. There's a question that came up aligned with your comments. What would be your point of view of the famous, but unfortunately not put in place, of the Mercosur agreement with the European community, which is still in the talking phase? It was negotiated 20 years ago, and the conclusion was that nothing happened, and it's still pending in the European Parliament. But of course, if we were able to sign this agreement, it would be half of the battle would be won. What is your point of view of this? This was a question that came from one of our viewers. Yes, it's a pity, it's a shame, because when I was in Asia, I accompanied this agreement between 10 Asian countries. And signed this agreement with various other countries, and Mercosur and the European Union, which is a very innovative agreement 10 years ago, or 20 years ago. It was signed under the same terms as that of 20 years, but the public opinion changed tremendously in relation to Brazil, especially in these last 3 years. So I think at this point, at the state things are in, this agreement will not be signed. There will be a lot of resistance on the part of Europeans. So I do not see this possibility positively today. But if we made an effort of changing the approach to Europe, to deal with European countries, to bring up the positive agendas, because we have to keep in mind that we have a very negative agenda, which is reforestation. But we have a lot of other positive agendas in relation to climate and so on that could take to a very productive dialogue with the Europeans, because they are totally committed to do something about climate change and so on. So if we were to change our approach, I think it would be possible to revert this process, which affects this agreement between Europe and Mercosur. Thank you, Marcos and Plinio, Andra. Thank you for your participation, which is so proactive. But I would like to say we are leading this process. I'm very proud of all of you, and thank you for accepting this invitation. We want to lead this process, which is something that LIDE has been doing in Brazil, and this has allowed us to do so. And we are very, very, very pleased, because in a very short period of time, we have produced a lot. So we are all invited to move forward and embrace all these agendas. I would like to thank all of you. And just very quickly, I would like to listen to Dr. Stauberg for final opinions, and then Plinio, Rafael, Guilherme, and Mark, and then Andrea will conclude. So this is my final words. I would like to thank all of you, and this is but the first of many such meetings that we hope to hold in the near future. Thank you very much. Dr. Stauberg, you have the floor.
Obrigada.
Thank you. I believe that it is very important to repeat again and again such events, but to explain things. Some of the things that were said are complicated, are very positive, but very complicated. So this has to be explained in an easier way so as people to understand what it is about. A question I have for you, what do you think about the Brazilian youth? Do they understand this positive aspect, or do you think they are skeptical? Well, Dr. Stausberg, I can tell you my opinion. My opinion, Plinio Nastari is my name. The Brazilian productive area is very effective from the door inside, but I agree with Dr. Yanko, but we had a very low communication to explain what we do from the door from outside. So we need to clarify, to explain without being very political, involving the academia, people who make decisions at different levels, so as to understand the Brazilian reality. The truth. We have to tell the truth in a very simple way, as you correctly said, in a very understanding way, so approachable that could be understood by everyone. And people should know that this effort has to be done. And I agree that this task that we have for the future, this is what will make people give value to the products, and leaving aside people that do not understand things and that get into the way of the understanding of people. So the leadership role, leaders as you and as LIDE, Dr. Furlan, Dr. Carioba, as well as other members of the panel, André, Orlando, Evandro, are essential and crucial so as to send this message, and we cannot be only effective from the door inside, but people should understand that this is something that has to be developed in a correct way, without any abuse, without excesses, without failure of understanding. So I think that you correctly identify the issue and the problem. I'd like to add, Dr. Plinio, as Dr. Hildegard said, it's an ant work. It's not enough of the initiative that we started today and that will resume in the future, but this has to be stronger and in a permanent way. Those who are here today are important people from different sectors, but few people to spread this all over the world, not only in Germany, but all over Europe. Dr. Plinio talked about the consumption of cars and the 29 grams of pollution compared to 124, the European average. All this debate about the electrical car, and this is another topic that is also very complex. In Germany, people talk about electrical cars, but from where comes this electricity? Before you have to have a battery, and then let's imagine that we'll have millions of cars. Where these batteries will go after they are being used, a consumption of 100 or 200 kilometers or 2,000 kilometers of each electric car. So all this energy aspect is not being analyzed well. We're talking about the momentaneous use of the electrical car, but before and after, we're not taking into consideration. I think this is a topic for another round between us and other people.
I would give you some very interesting information. The biggest plant of batteries in the world is the Tesla factory in the state of Nevada in the United States. This plant would need to take 500 years to produce the batteries in a sufficient number, an equivalent number, to 1 day of consumption of electric energy of the United States. It's impressive. 500 years of production of this year to be equivalent to 1 day of the consumption of electricity in the United States. Why is this? Because the energy density of the batteries is very small and will continue being so. Today, this density corresponds to 180 watts per kilo. The objective of the industry is 300 per kilo. You know what is the energy density of ethanol? 10,200 watts hour per kilo. And this is why you need so many batteries to substitute the energy of a fuel tank, of a fossil fuel tank. And this is why battery-run cars are so expensive. They will still exist, of course. The battery will exist, of course, for a very specific application. But today, the problem is that electrification is not with batteries. You can use electrification with liquid fuel as well. If this means a lower carbon footprint, great. But with ethanol, biodiesel is part of this category. Andrea, I think Rafael and Guilherme, could you give us the final comments? Okay, let's go. Thank you.
Okay.
Guilherme. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm going to talk about communication, the communication aspect, where everyone feels that Brazil, the productive sector, did not do a good work, externally speaking. This is how we see in our sector, in the productive sector, doing things from the door outside, and also the entity of the class entities. And in our specific case, we're seeing this as a company, a lack of preparation, lack of protection, a collective of the sector in order to help this agenda. Recently, we have been explaining our history to tell the truth, what is the corn ethanol, and all the implications, the use of lands for the Californian biofuel production, in order to have a good dialogue with the Californian program through the Foreign Affairs Ministry. And the question for Marcos and Plinio to answer, I'd like to have their opinion. The food versus fuel, which was a significant debate in 2008, and the recent regulation today of biofuel as a threat to the food industry, and also to have the perspective of the crop, of the great productivity that Brazil has in different formats, and in terms of cattle raise, farming, and trying to find paths to influence the technical debates in order to avoid the risk of not representing the diversity in the biofuel production. This is a huge, to find the communication channels to have a good dialogue in terms of this stuff. So in terms of the food versus feed. RenovaBio, another question. As Plinio said, very well audited, monitored. Do this at JES. AgroTool will present this tomorrow. We use their tools. We monitor more than 130 territories with the biomass and sell BioJ. We guarantee that it's free from deforestation and indigenous and quilombola areas and slave work. We monitor over 600, which helps our eligibility of a company. How do you perform this program? We talk with other international programs. This is my question. How we can commoditize this currency of bio in carbon all over the world. Brazil has the potential to produce much more than that they had the capacity to absorb, and something that we could export from Brazil. These are my final considerations, but I have some questions if we have time. So if you want to conclude, so I'm going to thank the opportunity. I think this is the beginning. This is an initiative that can be multiplied, as Andrea said. We need more people forming opinion, the press and people, and we should organize ourselves in order to provide this message. So I'd like to conclude, and the provocation of Rafael and Yanko as well. Marcos, please.
Versus fuel, quer dizer, o Brasil tem uma resposta muito mais inteligente.
Brazil has a much more intelligent answer than any other country in this area. Brazil's answer is much more practical. Sugarcane ethanol has its historical advantages that we are all aware of. This is a plant that produces food for people. It makes fuel for cars and produces electricity. So it's a full product. Even corn in Brazil, wheat corn is planted as a second harvest. It's not consuming an additional hectare of land whatsoever. We are simply producing the same area, an entire harvest of corn, which allows you to produce corn-based ethanol and energy, but which is basically used for beef cattle and for cattle raising in general, in a region which has an enormous number of cattle ranches and has a huge need to provide concentrates which are necessary. And as you need eucalyptus to fuel the corn mills plants, you can also plant eucalyptus, and in this way you take action in the sense of reducing the emissions. And more than that, so eucalyptus can help produce a zero carbon cattle. And so all of this integration that is happening with corn ethanol and sugarcane ethanol, eucalyptus, is something incredible. No other country in the world can do this as well as we can. So what is lacking is that what was mentioned by Rafael, this thing, and what was said by Plinio of the batteries, this has to be better known by people around the world. We have not been able to convey this abroad. And this is where LIDE has a role to play. You have people from LIDE taking action in Europe, and you can see we need to find a way to communicate permanently, not to go every once in a while, but we have to be there physically all the time, participating in any number of events that take place. Brazil has to be there. Thank you. This was just a final recommendation. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Marcos. Professor Plinio, would you like to conclude with an opinion? Well, just a final comment. I agree with Marcos, and I would just like to inform you that the Climate Crisis Committee and in the U.S. Congress, they produced a report at the end of 2020. It recognized the adoption of a model similar to RenovaBio in all the states of the United States. And so this this is being acknowledged out of Brazil, this model that I'm referring to, and I agree with Rafael that this labeling of biofuels is not adequate. The biofuels should be classified according to their carbon density, according to their capacity of substituting carbon, because the preference for one kind to another may lead to higher costs, because at the end of the day, when Europe seeks to benefit or privilege pulp and paper as a raw material, this cellulose is goes to a processing center and is broken through enzymes, acids, and other mechanical process, so that it is reduced to a tiny molecule of sucrose to be fermented. So this labeling of biofuels does not make any sense whatsoever. And it is a shame that this is how it is. And unfortunately, in Europe, we see one plant after another of beetroots closing down when they could be producing beetroot ethanol. And the biggest production of ethanol in Europe comes from corn. And there's also a lot of ethanol that comes from wheat in Europe as well. And I think in this case, the productivity is very low. But corn is very well used in Europe. So I think there needs to be more clarification. And Dr. Salzberg, you are absolutely right when you say that there's a need to have more quality communication. Thank you. Thank you, all of you. André, your closing comments? Just very quickly, because there's so much data that was presented. So I would like to thank for all the comments and also yes, I think we should embellish all this, especially everything that Brazil has been doing, is doing now. And we have to look at the greater possibility of continuing along these lines and veer away from the press, from this press that is so negative. And if anybody reads an article in the European press, they're only negative comments and focus only on one topic, and it talks about the politics of Brazil and the deforestation and the slashing and burning in the Amazon. And that's all that appears in the press. This is something, these news are very unique, and where the people, but businessmen, will never make investments if they continue reading this. So we have to show this very positive moment, especially the parity between the euro and the Brazilian real, or even the parity or the foreign exchange rate between the US dollar and the real. This makes it very, very favorable for investments. So Brazil is very cheap for investors, for the European or American investors. So this is a good time for Europeans and Americans to invest in Brazil. This has to be seen as a huge opportunity, as a very positive one for all these businessmen who are abroad, whether these are investors in the topics that we discussed today and the other topics that we will discuss at the next event. So we have to have more of these events on Brazilian agribusiness. So I would like to extend my warm thanks to all of you for your contributions that were so valuable. And I hope that we will really have our homework for all of us. And we're here to help you to the greatest possible extent. So our homework is to spread the good news that come from Brazil. But these are not news, these are facts. These are real facts. So we have to spread the news amongst the business community especially. Because the most part of the business community knows nothing of what's going on in Brazil in this respect. So Evandro, thank you very much for everybody. And Luis Furlan, thank you. Thank you for your contributions. And I hope that we will be able to continue including if we could continue today's topics and perhaps concentrate on others with even more details. So there's a lot to talk about, energy issues and biofuel issues. And what was said by Faust as well. These are all unknown facts. You know what Faust said. This is something that I did not know, and I'm still thoroughly familiar with Brazil because I've lived here so many years. But imagine someone who's not Brazilian. They do not know anything about this. You know, people abroad read the news on France and Brazil and Vietnam and so on. So this work, this slow work has to be done to plant the seed with perseverance and repeat again and again and again. It's not easy work, but if we pull our forces together, we will be able to do so. If we join all our efforts of all the experts who are here, we can get there. This is all of this is very interesting for me. So I just took down pages and pages of notes. Thank you very much, all of you. And we've already gone over our time. So thank you again. More thanks to everyone. Thank you. My very warm thanks. And I hope to see you very soon. This is the objective. Let us have more debates. Thank you very much.